What is there to say about Everywhere at the End of Time that hasn't been said already? I've been wanting to do a video on James Leland Kirby's The Caretaker moniker for quite some time now. However, every time I get myself in the zone to write the script for this video, I always end up scrapping the whole thing. We all know about its massive length, its audio portrayal of dementia and the sinister decay of nostalgia and memory, or how its creator, James Leland Kirby, manipulates samples in such a way that makes this whole thing feel so genuinely old. A hijacking of our brain to think we once had this brilliant romance in the 1930s or something, all slowly fading away to our aging mind. We've heard it all: the darkest album of all time, the most devastating album of all time, the absolute pinnacle of dark ambient, the last thing you hear before you die. We've seen the memes, and we've seen the praise. So what else can I deliver today that makes this video stand out? The thing is, there are certain legendary conversations that we all feel drawn to, no matter how many times they have been explored. It's kind of like explaining your case on how or why you believe Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player to ever live. What detail or statistic can you possibly dig up that hasn't been revisited time and time again? Regardless of what's been said about Everywhere at the End of Time or the legacy of Jordan's NBA career, we all want to still contribute to the tale, attempt to take a certain angle or wrap everything up in a way that no one else has ever done before. That is my goal today, to present to you a video that does one of the greatest musical creations of our time justice. It seems like every YouTuber has done some sort of exploration on Kirby's most massive work, and I think it's my turn to finally contribute. I've struggled for a long time trying to figure out how I want this video to go, but I think I've put together something I'm not only very proud of, but something you won't be able to find anywhere else on YouTube. I want you to take my hand as we venture through an artistic creation that will only become more and more cherished as time goes on. Today, we will be doing a massive deep dive into Everywhere at the End of Time. I want to explore every single possible avenue of this almost 7-hour-long masterclass in hauntology, musical aesthetics of the past explored in a way that has never been done in such extraordinary fashion. We will take a look at its story, its production, its creator James Leland Kirby and his previous works, its themes, the artwork, its massive online popularity, the insane hunt for its samples, and just everything else in between to make this video the ultimate hub world of James Leland Kirby's greatest work. I'll be bringing in some troops with me along the way. In this video, we'll be joined by a diverse selection of musicians, artists, and fellow YouTubers. I can't thank each of them enough for joining me on this journey you and I are about to take, and I insist you check out each of their crafts whenever you get the chance. During the process of creating this video these past couple of months, I was also fortunate enough to get in contact with Kirby through email. I let him know that I would be making a pretty lengthy video on his works and asked if he would be willing to give me anything interesting or lesser known about his work, maybe some stuff you just can't find throughout the web and could only be discovered through the man himself. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Caretaker community, specifically the Caretaker Discord server, for being such a huge help in providing me direction and documents to go off of to make this video the ultimate breakdown and accurate exploration of Everywhere at the End of Time. And one last thing before we begin this video. As you and I spend some time together today, I want to share with you a personal story of mine, a person that I'm always reminded of every single time I begin this journey of an album. Everywhere at the End of Time is such a personal experience for each individual listener, so it's inevitable I share what it does for me in this video. If this is your first time here at the channel and you love exploring fascinating music, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn all notifications on so you never miss a future upload. While you're at it, throw a like on this video or share it with a friend, and let me know in the comments below of any other artists, albums, or genres you would like to see explored in a future video. Doing all that helps the channel out tremendously, and I can't thank you enough for being here with me today. And with that being said, welcome to the ballroom, my friend, and may it remain eternal. Let's get lost in the Caretakers Everywhere at the End of Time. While there are many videos on YouTube that do an excellent job of explaining the Caretaker Everywhere at the End of Time and its obvious exploration of Alzheimer's and dementia through sound, I find most of them don't really get into the finer details. Yeah, we all know about its massive length, how dark it all is, and that stuff, but how was it made? Who is James Leland Kirby? What about all of his other projects that, for many people, lay undiscovered as they get hidden behind the presence of something as massive as Everywhere at the End of Time? Are you one of those people who have finished Everywhere at the End of Time and now you're struggling to find something else to move on to? I will be breaking down this video into chapters, as it is a necessity due to this video's massive length. I want to make sure the pace and flow of the video moves smoothly, so I want to give each individual topic or area of discussion its own space. A DJ in Manchester in the early 90s, James quickly realized that he wanted to make electronic music of his own, inspired by tracks and mixes pouring out of Chicago and Detroit, as well as the pop production works of Trevor Horn and Belgian New Beat. Kirby wanted to match all of the energy coming out of the clubs at the time. With no previous knowledge on electronic music production hardware, understanding where to even begin would prove to be quite a difficult task for James. There was obviously no internet like today back then, no massive online community to share ideas and learn from. Furthermore, James reminded me that this was 1989 and 1990. In Manchester at the time, it was pretty unusual to listen to this type of music in the first place, and the scene was definitely not as prominent where James was compared to other places around the globe. He remembers most people in Manchester focusing their taste around indie music, his mates at school being interested in bands like Happy Mondays or the Stone Roses. In his interview with Trebuchet from 2011, we really get a detailed look at this early stage in Kirby's career from the man himself. It was a very steep learning curve back then, as I had no idea how any of it worked at all, so I kept buying hardware and trying to run it all off an Amiga running Music X, which was so bad it was good. I had no idea what I was doing, but two good friends were also using it, and we kind of helped each other make sense of the equipment we had, and I guess I haven't stopped since. He notes his earliest synthesizers being the Roland SH-09 and the SH-101, as well as a Roland JV-1080. Combined with cheap drum machines and no instructions given to him, Kirby's music production methods fell under the direction of trial and error, all in an attempt to recreate the energy from the nightclubs which he loves so much. In 1999, Kirby would begin work under the moniker The Caretaker, a project that would go on to explore the relishment of awareness, nostalgia, and cheerfulness, only for those simple joys to be gradually broken down over time in the form of audio manipulation. The journey of the Caretaker character would come to an end on March 14, 2019, with the final installment of Everywhere at the End of Time, as well as another release that would be dropped on the very same day, a little surprise golden farewell to the fans, known as Everywhere an Empty Bliss. Of course, the Caretaker is only one of the James Leland Kirby monikers. The Stranger, where we follow this mysterious protagonist through their ominous auditory journeys, is another Kirby alias that focuses its entire discography around a narrative or character. VIII, or Volume vs. Mass, was an experimental music and sound collage project that also became a label for Kirby as well in Volume vs. Mass test records. And last but not least, Kirby also distributes as himself, where he releases original music. In January of 1996, James Leland Kirby, along with fellow artist Andrew McGregor, would create Volume vs. Mass test records. Knowing Andrew, or Andy, since James was about 5 or 6 years old, the two put in £250 each to get the label up and running. The label released works from a wide variety of artists involved in genres that may have had a tough time finding its place on your everyday label. Sounds including noise, soundscape, breakcore, mashup, and many more found a home in Volume vs. Mass test records between 96 and 2008. Because Volume vs. Mass test records never had an overseas division, label releases tend to be extremely collectible outside of the United Kingdom. Some noteworthy releases in the earlier discography include 1998's Split Series No. 1, a 12-inch that drew together both band-oriented and electronic music, and 1999's Pig, which was simply just the sounds of pigs feeding at Kirby's uncle's farm in the northwest of England. Many reviewers mistook the sound of feeding pigs for that of pigs being killed. Volume vs. Mass was pretty successful in its own right. Many may only know Kirby for his work as the Caretaker due to its current success today throughout the internet, but as Volume vs. Mass, Kirby had a Single of the Week on British music magazine NME, New Musical Express, as well as loads of other press at the time from doing tons of chaotic shows with and without Andy. In 2006, we would see the most popularized volume versus mass release, The Death of Rave. And look, if you think Everywhere at the End of Time is long, take a step back there, my friend, because if you were to listen to all of The Death of Rave, you would be looking at a runtime of just over 19 hours through its over 200 tracks. In 2014, 8 tracks off of the original Death of Rave were remastered and packaged under the name The Death of Rave: A Partial Flashback. Doing this allowed the listener to experience the project in a way more reasonable manner. It juiced what Kirby created into a far shorter runtime. And while the act of listening to all of the original The Death of Rave was meant to be off-putting and hard to tackle in the first place, the 2014 rework is a solid way for those looking to experience Kirby's feelings on the death of the true rave scene in a far shorter span of time. Of course, The Death of Rave was vast, too vast to digest, and so 8 tracks were lifted from the project and have now been remastered by Matt Colton as a document from a dead past, a monument to a lost work, an idea finally set in stone via a physical format, proof of its existence. In 1997, we would be introduced to James Leland Kirby's The Stranger moniker with a release of the same name. Over 10 years later, Kirby would return to The Stranger with Bleaklow in 2008, and then Watching Dead Empires in Decay in 2013. We see a more brooding and atmospheric side of Kirby with The Stranger, compared to his more popular releases under The Caretaker. While The Caretaker moves from delicate bliss to a distorted collapse, all compressed through the specific and personal narratives you create for those releases in your mind, The Stranger embodies something a bit more grand and cinematic. Instead of feeling like you're sitting in your grandparents' living room with something like Everywhere at the End of Time, The Stranger brings us to an abandoned alleyway in an endless dystopian city, painted in black and white. I find the artwork of Watching Dead Empires in Decay to be the perfect screenshot of not who or what The Stranger would sound like, but where The Stranger would sound like. Deteriorating apartment complexes with families stuck inside that deserve much better. While looking under his discography where he runs as himself, we see some absolute classics that have also gained some serious recognition online in this day and age. Some personal favorites of mine include Eager to Tear Apart the Stars from 2011, such a cosmic experience, your ears float in the dead of space, and even though space is a vacuum and you can't hear sound, Kirby somehow makes it possible. Another big release, which I also covered in a previous video on this channel, We So Tired of All the Darkness in Our Lives, came out just 6 years later, which uses sharp strings, lonely pianos, and pads and synths, ranging from all things ambient to downright frightening. Kirby's production in these releases become beautifully layered, diverse compositions that have us feeling like the last person in the universe, trapped in a musty room with nothing but a window separating us from the rainy day outside. These tracks are arrestingly clear-headed and somber. How you decipher the meanings of these moods and atmospheres is where the beauty and longevity of these tracks lie, as patience and repeated listens will reveal new views of the landscape as the seasons change. After the conclusion of Volume vs. Mass test records, a new label project from Kirby would spawn in 2009. History Always Favors the Winners, which, like, come on, that is the coolest name for a label, straight up. The label now houses all of the works of Kirby, from The Stranger to The Caretaker, as he now resides in Krakow, Poland. While the main focus of this video is obviously Kirby's work as The Caretaker, I find many people crave something else to latch onto after they finish something as gargantuan as Everywhere at the End of Time. If you are one of those people, or you are just someone who is looking to dive into something new and chilling, make sure you check out some of these other works from Kirby. There is a massive amount of audio to go through that will have you busy for weeks to come. I promise you, it is definitely worth your time. With all of that being said, let's begin visiting our old little friend, The Caretaker.
So the first time I really became aware of The Caretaker, it was actually tech. When we lived in Dayton, we were on our way to my house to work on our band's music or whatever. And Tech was really into reading the music blogs and staying on top of stuff at that time. And he had read about this album in Tiny Mixtapes, and he played for me long-term remotes from the album Persistent Repetition of Phrases. And it was just like, it's almost like proto New World or whatever, because it was just this perfect chord progression, just like the most emotive part of a song that Leyland Kirby had sort of snipped and just looped ad nauseum, like, music concrete, and just drenched in reverb. And it was just so indulgent. When it first started, I remember just thinking, like, oh my God, what is this track? And then Tech's like, oh yeah, like, you're really gonna love this because it's just the same thing again and again for like 5 minutes. I was like, holy shit, who is this?
The deterioration of the mind is a subject James Leyland Kirby traverses through with The Caretaker, using sound to portray the destruction of memory or the worsening symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's as it slowly but surely consumes the entirety of a person. It's a process that doesn't happen overnight, and Kirby demonstrates the ruthlessness of the disease by stealthily corrupting the audio throughout an album's runtime. One moment, you're frolicking in memories of the past, and the next moment, you're wondering when did everything get so grim. It feels like only 2 minutes have passed, yet you look down at the time and you realize you've been listening to one of his creations for over 40 minutes already. There are over a dozen interviews, way more than that actually, with James Leyland Kirby you can visit throughout the web. Many of these are incredibly lengthy and are amazing ways to take a look at Kirby's methods straight from, James Leyland Kirby. With all of this material available, exploring James's intentions as a musician and how he arrives at his finished product would take hours, maybe even days, if we were to literally explore all of the research and findings gathered by the Caretaker fanbase and community over the years. To sum it all up, the significance in Kirby's production as the Caretaker comes down to this incredible ability to lull us into submission and doom. A musical Venus flytrap. You'll know this firsthand if you've ever experienced the work of Kirby under this moniker. Projects, especially Everywhere at the End of Time, are performed with varying intensities of sample manipulation. There are moments where samples are only altered through slight pitch movement, or times when they're peppered with only a bit of reverb. Looping is an obvious mainstay here as well, that ticking trance and inescapable quicksand. Your deteriorated audio equipment, the warmest crackle of a worn-out vinyl, and all of these characteristics, these are only the innocent moments, because as we dig deeper, tracks become an audio collage of their former self. Battered and left for dead, sounds begin to pop their heads out for vital breaths of fresh air before being dragged back down into the conflagration of all the other sounds. A frightening feeding frenzy fate. The life of the Caretaker would span between 3 different decades. Selected Memories from the Haunted Ballroom would be the first work Kirby would release under the Caretaker alias in September of 1999. Inspired by scenes and settings from the 1980 horror classic The Shining, this would be our first look at Kirby's experimentation and fascination with old 30s sample work as the Caretaker. In my emails with Kirby, he states that work for the first Caretaker album actually started in 1997 and was mostly made with no computer at all, just a turntable and some effects. Aged ballroom jazz selections and waltz numbers are warped, bended, and distorted to create a confusing atmosphere, all mixed throughout the album with chilling moans and erratic sounds. Kirby's aesthetic direction present in Selected Memories from the Haunted Ballroom, despite it maybe not being as memorable or successful as Everywhere at the End of Time, was chilling nonetheless. Initial Caretaker releases got a lot of support from the legendary DJ John Peel, one of the original and longest-serving DJs of BBC Radio 1, which helped spark attention to the Caretaker name. Kirby also recalls having a review of Selected Memories in a Russian Playboy publication for some odd reason.
The project really started as an exploration of sort of terrifying themes that were more based in the supernatural. And the genre was haunted ballroom music, and it was inspired by that last shot from The Shining, where Jack Torrance, who is the caretaker, of the Overlook Hotel, becomes trapped in the portrait and becomes one of the many, evil spirits that haunt the hotel. But if you watch that scene, you can hear this ballroom music being played, somewhere far away, kind of echoing through the empty halls, and just that sound inspired the entire project.
As the Caretaker moniker continued, it slowly evolved from centering on the setting of ballroom ghosts to decaying memories of a failing brain. We would receive 9 more releases from the Caretaker spanning from 2001 to 2012, but starting in 2016 is where our story today really begins. In September of that year, James would... Wait, hold on 1 second. Am I missing anything super important that we should explore before we finally get into Everywhere at the End of Time? Look, I'm going to say this straight up. An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is one of my favorite albums of all time, and easily my favorite James Leyland Kirby release of all time. If you've seen my top 10 favorite albums video, I've placed this album in the honorable mention section, and when it comes down to it, I just choose to listen to An Empty Bliss Beyond This World far more than I do Everywhere at the End of Time. The way I see it, An Empty Bliss Beyond This World takes all 6+ hours of Everywhere at the End of Time and condenses it into one highly pressurized ball of clay, literally. At under an hour long, An Empty Bliss is far more practical to listen to, and I don't mean to take anything away from Everywhere at the End of Time, but if you want to truly get the full experience of that project, you really do need to dedicate almost 7 hours of your day to experience Everywhere at the End of Time the way it was supposed to be experienced. And if you're one of those people who really only visit Everywhere at the End of Time for stages 1 and 2, the more blissful and warm areas throughout its runtime, which we will obviously get into later on in this video, An Empty Bliss makes even more sense for your case. It's a beautiful collection of sample reworks piled into 15 tracks, a majority of these tracks glazed in a nature of reminiscing about a jovial past. James discovered the sample material for An Empty Bliss at a record shop in Brooklyn, New York. In his 2011 interview with Vice magazine, James recalls spending about $5 on a selection of 10 or so records in a section of dance band albums he found to be interesting at first glance. They were among some of the cheapest records in the shop, and Kirby was pleasantly surprised to discover they would be the perfect tunes to have some fun with. Amazingly, when I made it back to Berlin, the mood on them all was incredible. Released on May 19th, 2011, An Empty Bliss Beyond This World is easily the runner-up in the race for the most popular and recognized Caretaker release. And as time goes by and more people stumble upon Everywhere at the End of Time, it's amazing to watch the love for this project grow as well due to the thousands of people who discover An Empty Bliss after looking further into the Caretaker discography.
Then if you're going to talk about Everywhere at the End of Time, you really have to talk about An Empty Bliss Beyond This World, because that was really kind of, I feel like, the turning point for Leyland Kirby, because I think that the Caretaker series up to that point had definitely explored these ideas of the mind deteriorating and losing memory and things like that. And it sort of had gotten there from that sort of supernatural beginning, almost as more like, like a simulator more than an actual album or a concept album. And I think that really kind of hit full pitch with An Empty Bliss Beyond This World. I remember really being struck by how kind of focused his telling of that story and his construction of that simulation was. There was just a small pool of melodies that sort of came back as the album progressed, and it was really the concept of Everywhere at the End of Time, but in a sort of much smaller package. So as the album progressed, you would hear melodies from the beginning of the album, but maybe just the left channel would be cutting in and out, like a memory engram that's slowly deteriorating and sort of falling away. And that was another album that I sort of just completely just let take over my life. Like, just one of those albums, those albums where there's just like a year that the album comes out that you just like, you listen to it like 10,000 times and it's always okay. It's always what you want to hear, for whatever reason. I don't know, maybe I was in a dark place.
On An Empty Bliss Beyond This World, we feel as if we are ascending the concept of memories entirely. Tracks like I Feel As If I Might Be Vanishing are objectively beautiful, a comforting cloak over the remembrance of good or bad times. Distant foggy horns and hypersensitive weeping strings chug us through a smoky, gunmetal-colored ocean. Mental Caverns Without Sunshine has us looking back at the journey of our lives, coughing, tired, and in need of a place to rest as we stand atop that hill, looking at all of the places we have been to throughout our lifetime. I like to think of An Empty Bliss Beyond This World, even though it came out a couple of years before, as the sequel to Everywhere at the End of Time, in the sense of what we all think of it narratively. The aura of the audio in An Empty Bliss is almost heavenly. It's the location we've all deserved to arrive at after the struggles in Everywhere at the End of Time. It's generally a bright and airy listen, delicate at times and euphoric at others. Some find this album to still feel a bit eerie and whatnot, but I've just never felt that way about it. Sourced from a mysterious collection of 78s, these vague snippets of archaic sonics reflect the ability of Alzheimer's patients to recall the songs of their past, and with them, recollections of places, people, moods, and sensations. This is an old picture of my grandmother, and she was, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful souls I've ever had the honor of knowing. She was kind beyond kind, full of stories always, especially if you made her week by letting her make you a cup of espresso and staying for a while. Now, my grandmother never had dementia. She passed away from cancer 2 years ago, 2 years to the very date as I began writing the script for this video. Everywhere at the End of Time has this amazing ability to make us remember or miss someone. It's a very personalized experience that can cause you to reflect on something that has happened in your life. The project hits us each in different, unique ways, from those who have been directly impacted by a loved one suffering with Alzheimer's or dementia, to those who just experience this feeling in their gut that they should maybe call their parents and check in on them. Everywhere at the End of Time defies sound. I always notice that something special happens before something drastic happens. It's a tick in time that is always suspiciously sweet, something out of the ordinary that you never noticed as it was happening, and whenever I look back on those moments, I always say to myself, I wish I was a bit more aware or just picked up on the little things. But I guess that's life anyway. We'll get back to this story a little later. Alrighty, so as I was getting to before we started talking about An Empty Bliss, in September of 2016, Kirby would release Stage 1 of Everywhere at the End of Time, what soon would become his magnum opus. After its final installation of Stage 6 that dropped in 2019, Everywhere at the End of Time would end up clocking in at just over 6.5 hours in runtime when listening to all 6 stages in succession.
And so when Everywhere at the End of Time was first announced and came out, it was like, holy shit, here we go. Like, this is the Caretaker magnum opus. It's, those ideas from An Empty Bliss, but just really blown out to an extreme that had never been seen before. And it was great for me too, because another reason why I've always admired Leyland Kirby's work is that he's really willing to indulge himself with these concepts, and he's never been concerned with accessibility at all. And I think that the length of his albums is another way that he sort of leans in on that. That's the reason why I made Dare Like Mega Tower was originally inspired by the fact that Leyland Kirby had made an album that was just shy of 4 hours, and I wanted to beat that. So that was something that kind of inspired me personally. And so I think that Everywhere at the End of Time is really kind of the final punctuation of that sort of just unwilling to restrain himself.
In a nutshell, the project features some of the most riveting sample work you can find, period. The vitality in these weathered-sounding relics from George Olsen, Chester Gaylord, Leighton and Johnstone, Wayne King, and a plethora of other artists sampled by the Caretaker who, when listening to the sound quality of their music today, reminds you of the contents in your grandparents' closets, wrinkled leather jackets and yellow pillow covers somehow brought to life in audio form. As most of you probably know already, samples are the name of the game in Everywhere at the End of Time, and something to look out for is the repurposing of those samples throughout the entirety of the project. It's fascinating when you notice sounds you swore you heard in stages 1 or 2 reappear in a future time on the album, like the muted trumpet in the intro portion of J1 Post-Awareness Confusions coming from the same artist sampled in Into Each Other's Eyes, Morris Winnick. And the reappearance of samples aren't just limited to the confines of Everywhere at the End of Time. This is an expansive universe, and Kirby makes that well known by sneaking in samples used from previous Caretaker releases. The callbacks to past albums in Everywhere at the End of Time, while it's far more noticeable in Stage 3, are present in every stage. A good example of this would be Stage 1's All That Follows Is True, being a less distorted version of Under a Warm Golden Light from 2003's We'll All Go Riding on a Rainbow. Or how about the sample used in Childishly Fresh Eyes, which comes from the same Russ Morgan record as the sample used in Camaraderie at Arm's Length on An Empty Bliss? What makes the repurposing of samples so much fun? In a way, I know that using the word fun might sound kind of wacky here, is that you find yourself trying to decide if you've actually heard the sound earlier in the project or not. Sounds may feel familiar, but due to the massive length of the project, it's so easy to become lost in the audio, unsure if this sound actually happened before or if it's your mind just playing tricks on you. It's a really interesting sensation and a lesser discussed characteristic of Everywhere at the End of Time that I find adds to the overall theme of the project tremendously. Stage 1 of Everywhere at the End of Time starts off jovial and nostalgic, with Kirby presenting happy memories in the foreground, even though very early on we can already sense he's got something up his sleeve. Kirby does this by knitting the samples together with innocent cracks, delicate pops, and, to put it lightly, a healthy dosage of reverb poured over the entire Sunday. Unfortunately, once Everywhere at the End of Time gets going into stages 2, 3, and so on, the memories begin to strip away like wooden shingles in a storm. Kirby brilliantly injects the downfall of the music into our ears like an IV. A slow drip, all simulating the rotting of the mind once under the clutches of Alzheimer's. James's dedication to dissension must be applauded. His ability to make you feel like you're watching the life of your grandparents through an old tube television is breathtaking. A program broadcasting the happiest moments of their youth all the way to the final breath of their life. The project's 6-part series was released throughout a period of 3 years, with each stage being released 6 months apart from each other to simulate the progression of time. Each release or stage is accompanied by paintings from English artist Ivan Seal. As we progress through each stage, we begin to see the artwork decay along the way, becoming less concrete and more abstract, until we hit that last stage where we're given nothing but what is believed to be the back of an art piece or a canvas with the tape that once held it up on a wall. Artwork is such an important part of the listening experience, at least in my opinion. I know many of you kind of like to go into music without any context or anything like that, but I think the use of artwork and having colors to relate to, for example, creates an incredible narrative and opportunity for imagination. It creates moods, smells, tastes, and the occasional deja vu. even if none of us are actually in our old age and suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. This duo of Kirby and Seal is really the perfect combo, a pairing of artwork and music that evolves the intended moods and uncanny undertones throughout many of Kirby's works. The two go back over 20 years, with Seal even appearing on one of the early Volume vs. Mass compilations, and both have found a way to bounce off of one another perfectly.
Hi, my name is Justin Morton. I'm a digital illustrator, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Ivan Seal's art. It's one thing to paint what you see, but to paint how something feels is a different beast altogether, and that's what Ivan does so well. He breaks subjects down to their pure feelings with his use of color, texture, and spatial placement. His paintings pull me in even if the subject matter has become so abstract that it's lost forever, only to be a concept of a feeling or memory. That's really the beauty of Ivan Seal's work. I believe Ivan's work complements the Caretaker's work perfectly. The way Ivan deconstructs and distorts our memories into a facade of something we thought we once knew. The music and the art truly just go hand in hand.
Like I said earlier in this video, there are way too many video essays out there that do a solid job at exploring everywhere at the end of time. But one video in particular that presents the beauty in this connection between the music of Kirby and the artwork of Seal is this video right here by the YouTuber A Bucket of Jake. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below for those who want to explore that artwork aspect a little bit more.
What's up, y'all? It's me, the Caretaker man, Jake Joseph, also known on the internet as A Bucket of Jake. If you've heard my name before, chances are you've seen my video dissecting the album Pat is currently talking about, The Caretaker's Everywhere at the End of Time. The album is, for lack of a better phrase, a monster in every way imaginable, in length, in lore, in art, and in subject matter. Creating my original Caretaker video was a feat in itself. I think the album Everywhere at the End of Time is such an anomaly because even though the subject matter is quite uniform with the themes of a dementia patient, everyone experiences it differently. My reaction could be different from Pad's, whose could be different from yours, whose could be different from your friends, whose could be different from their dogs, and so on and so on. I have to say, I think James Leyland Kirby is finally getting the deserved light shown on his work, with it now creeping into pop culture with shitty Instagram memes and shitty TikTok challenges. It's a TikTok challenge. What? This is a very important album that I'm just happy now to see it getting the eyes that it truly deserves. And if from a shitty TikTok meme, someone genuinely finds like a positive outcome from this, all the best luck to you, man.
Now that we have a solid foundation for what the whole project is all about on the surface level, I want to explore each stage with you individually. Standing in front of Everywhere at the End of Time can seem like you're facing a real behemoth of work. But when breaking down each stage for what it is, it almost feels like we're experiencing 6 different films that seemingly blend into one another instead of this gigantic beast. Let's dive in. Stage 1. Here we experience the first signs of memory loss. This stage is most like a beautiful daydream, the glory of old age and recollection, the last of the great days. Stage 1 of Everywhere at the End of Time starts off whimsical, happy, and pretty much simple. Kirby lays down repetitious loops of generally warm and happy showroom tunes and relaxing piano selections to get you situated, get comfy, and make you feel at home. The beginning is quaint and peaceful, however, the textures are aplenty to really make it feel like you are connected with a person of the past, a chance for you to run through the brightest moments of their life. Kirby sautés a delicate amount of warping and cracking as he feeds the sound through a heavy cloak of reverb to give you an unbelievably thick and smoky veil for the tunes dancing and swaying in your ears. Stage 1 is a very inviting listen. The first 40 or so minutes of the project, even a good chunk of Stage 2 that we'll get into shortly, is pretty lukewarm and comforting. Uploading each stage with a description, Kirby just wanted to set the stage for the whole scenario of the album, an attempt to understand what losing your memory may feel like. Kirby states that, when work began on this series, it was difficult to predict how the music would unravel itself. Dementia is an emotive subject for many, and always a subject I have treated with maximum respect. According to Kirby's description for Stage 1, we know exactly where we are and what's bound to happen. This is it for our subject, the last hurrah, the last chance to remember the good times, the happy moments, the first kiss, the honeymoon, a night out at the ballroom. Stage 1 opens up with a retexturizing of Al Bowley and Sid Phillips' Heartaches, the perfect beginning to this whole journey. It's a triumphant introduction that pairs perfectly with the idea that you are in this for the long haul, and everything else that follows in Stage 1 just adds to the overdose of this beauty. Kirby just spoon feeds you happy memories. I feel as if I'm sitting next to my grandparents hearing them tell me stories of their past. My grandfather's time in the Navy with Track B3, quiet internal rebellions. I picture him sailing the Mediterranean Sea, wondering when he'll see his family next. My grandmother's experience when she arrived in the States from Italy, Track A6, Things That Are Beautiful and Transient, must have been what it felt like to see the Statue of Liberty for the first time. Although the music may start off rich and full of pride, there is a clear contradiction with what we are seeing in some of the track titles. You can't help but sense that time is running out, and you're being rushed. How many happy memories can you fit before the remembering begins to rip? It's just a burning memory, we don't have many days, quiet internal rebellions. Tracks like The Loves of My Entire Life, when they end abruptly, can send a chill down your spine. You really cozy up to the constant looping, as if these tracks or memories can last forever, only for them to just stop and echo away. Each track or memory destined to being ripped out like a page in a book. All types of dementia are progressive. This means that the structure and chemistry of the brain become increasingly damaged over time. The artwork for Stage 1 presents a roll of papers, or maybe a newspaper, unfolding at the ends. While the core of the roll stays intact, upright, and chest out, we see that the ends of the paper are already beginning to unravel, and show some slight wear. This roll of papers, strong at the body but weak at the ends, all perfectly replicate these slight imperfections that are slowly developing underneath the warm and cozy sounds of Stage 1. Although these 12 introductory tracks of Everywhere at the End of Time are beautiful and coherent, you can tell something is already beginning to unfold for the worse under the slight cracks and pops. But just how worse can it get? Stereotypical oldness, I believe, is the best way to summarize the colors used in the artwork for Stage 1. Old photos in our social studies textbooks from elementary school having us believe that the past was constantly coated with a rich and heavy color palette, images giving off the idea that if you were alive back then, there was some sort of filter over your vision that painted everything in these 3 colors alone. A dusty blue found in the accents of a uniform in a Babe Ruth-era baseball game, muted greens on a dormant old tube TV, and a gentle gray seen in smiling snapshots from a time long ago, all exfoliate our mind with comfort, tranquility, and warmth. Colors that warp you straight into your grandparents' house, those shelves that have held the same objects for decades that you don't understand how they haven't collapsed yet. Just like the sounds present on Stage 1, the colors are clearly historic and directly relatable to an older time. It's as if I'm suddenly craving a hot dog from Ebbets Field. One of my favorite things surrounding the lore of the Caretaker and Everywhere at the End of Time is the hunt for its samples. Obviously, the earlier stages in the project have more structure, healthier bones, and upfront samples that can be heard more clearly, causing these earlier stages of the projects to have most, and in certain cases all, of its original samples discovered. As we dive deeper into Everywhere at the End of Time, things get a bit more complicated, to put it lightly. When tracks in the early stages can consist of one jolly old sample, stages 5 and 6 can get absolutely crazy.
With 6.5 hours of material throughout 6 stages in the project, the Caretaker has ultimately created a scavenger hunt for lost media fanatics. Hey guys, Blame It on George here, and today I'll be covering the lost media aspect of Everywhere at the End of Time. We've seen it time and time again, artists and producers sampling other people's music in their works. We have seen producers just grab a single measure of a track, throw some drums behind it, and create hip-hop classics. And on the other hand, we've seen artists completely dissect a sample and meticulously place each microsample into a sound that spawns a creation completely detached from the previous source material. With Everywhere at the End of Time, you get the best of both worlds. While the project starts off pretty straightforward with its samples, later sections of the project begin to smash multiple samples into one another and create this hazy, cloudy, thick audio configuration. Because of this, many of the samples are extremely hard to point out, making a chunk of the works unidentifiable. Fans have become fascinated at the idea of 100% completing the sample hunt across the entirety of Everywhere at the End of Time, stages 5 and 6 being, of course, the most difficult of the bunch to figure out. James Leyland Kirby has so many different ways of hiding these samples. An example of this is when he has certain samples spawn in the left audio channel while others could spawn in the right. An intense moment of this can be found in section A of the track K1 Advanced Plaque Entanglements on stage 5, where multiple samples hit you from various directions. Because James Leyland Kirby is known to reuse many samples from his previous works, many of the now identified samples were first spotted by longtime fans, who noticed familiar sounds to past projects, swearing they've heard these little bites of audio on a track before, only to realize that the sample in question was also used on an earlier release in his discography. And many times, those same samples on earlier Kirby projects are already identified due to them being way more clear and upfront than how the same sample or sound is used in Everywhere at the End of Time. All in all, if you're a fan of lost media and a fan of music, Everywhere at the End of Time is a mountain to climb and chisel away at. Come on down and join the hunt.
There is an incredible document that I have used numerous times during my research for this video, created by Mr. Mister, who will be joining us later on in this video to go deeper into the whole sample hunt. As for stage 1, its final missing sample was discovered on December 11th, 2020, causing Everywhere at the End of Time stage 1 to be 100% solved. We will spend a whole section of this video diving into the fascinating sample hunt, as Mr. Mister will be joining us to share the journey they and many others have been on to crack the entirety of the Everywhere at the End of Time sample hunt. Released on September 22nd, 2016, Stage 1's 12 tracks, separated as A1 through A6 and B1 through B6, are the most delicate and happy moments in the life of the Caretaker. Although the tracks slightly give off a sense of dread and fear with their titles, the earliest recognition that something isn't quite clicking like it used to, there is a positive mood to the first 40 or so minutes of Everywhere at the End of Time. But how many memories, distant stories, and recollections of the good times can we squeeze in before we can remember? Really quick before we continue this video, I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has supported me by becoming a patron of mine on Patreon these past couple of months. Many of you know, if you've been around here for a while, it is my dream to be able to do this channel as a full-time thing. I'll never stop working towards achieving that goal, and without a doubt, the support on Patreon has been the major factor in getting me that much closer. If you're interested in further supporting what I do, as well as getting a bunch of exclusive content like access to our patron-only Discord server Club Chennington, head on over to my Patreon page and consider signing up today. The link is in the description below, and do not worry, if you can't become a patron, it is more than all good. The simple fact that you are taking the time out of your life to watch something I've created will always be mind-blowing to me, and I am so grateful for you just spending some time here with me today. Cheers, and let's get on with the video. It all started when I paid her a visit. I had a small chunk of time one day, and knowing I would be passing by her neighborhood at some point throughout my errands, I thought it would be nice to stop by and see how they were doing, and, if they needed anything or whatnot. As I got older, graduated college, and began indulging myself in new projects or hobbies whenever I wasn't at work, I found I always was in a rush when visiting them. I mean, with a billion things to do throughout my day, how could I not be? Right? I don't know. I guess that's just what happens as you get older. Your mind is constantly focused on your endeavors, and the value of paying a visit isn't a top priority much. And we've all heard that same story before from people older than us. Don't take for granted the time you have with loved ones older than you, but we all never listen. So I walked inside, did the usual hello, do you need me to pick anything up for you? From the supermarket, blah, 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 all the same. That same mundane checklist I go through every time I paid them a visit. And looking back at it all, It was really terrible of me. I mean, I wasn't mean or nasty to her. I just always felt, at the time, I had more important things to do. And deep down, I always felt like I was just trying to be in and out. I guess I was never truly there. But my grandmother, on the other hand, she relished these simple moments. She would always be so happy to see me, glasses bigger than her goddamn head, and the pounds of jewelry she had on, even though it was just us sitting for a half an hour or so with some coffee in her kitchen, it always looked like she was like going to a wedding. Stage 2. The second stage is the self-realization and awareness that something is wrong with a refusal to accept that. More effort is made to remember so memories can be more long form, with a little more deterioration in quality. The overall personal mood is generally lower than the first stage and at a point before confusion starts setting in. Back in stage 1, we saw hints of something beginning to go astray through the track titles. In stage 2, hints turned to more of a slap in the face. In stage 1, we saw song titles such as Things That Are Beautiful and Transient, The Loves of My Entire Life, and Into Each Other's Eyes. In stage 2, the Caretaker begins to reveal itself a bit more. Once we get going into the first track of stage 2, A Losing Battle is Raging, there is this almost vacuum-like sound constantly galloping as it parasitically consumes the sample selections that were once fully coherent in stage 1. A Losing Battle is Raging, Surrendering to Despair, Last Moments of Pure Recall. There isn't one piece of work here that seems hopeful or carefree at all. Something horrible is brewing. But as mentioned earlier, there's still a sense of some sort of musical pleasure here. Yeah, it's a bit sadder in its resonance, but we still get the swinging and swaying of these old musical fragments, horns, pianos, and strings that sound like the smell of mothballs. Seriously, I hate to get off like the serious train for a moment, but goddamn Kirby, you are pinpoint accurate with these sample choices. The texture of these tracks, the work Kirby surgically performed on them make them seem so delicate yet so thick and smoky. One touch and the whole thing will poof into a pile of dust. Released on April 5th, 2017, Stage 2 is also worded or categorized like Stage 1, C1 through C5, and then D1 through D5. Both stages showcasing a coherent mind with the ability to organize and archive. Multiple samples from Paul Whiteman and Chester Gaylord can be found throughout this section of Everywhere at the End of Time. This stage also has had all of its samples 100% discovered as of July 3rd, 2020. With not too much of a change from Stage 1 in regards to production on Kirby's end, one thing you will notice, however, is James allowing the tracks to play out in Stage 2 far more than he did with Stage 1. While Stage 1 saw him repeating the most euphoric moments of these samples to seemingly infinity, Stage 2 doesn't focus on just the highs of the original sample material. These samples are chewed on as well, certain sections just dropped out and scrapped to give off the feeling that the memories are seriously beginning to crumble. We're given some flowers with Stage 2, and while most times when flowers are given we know that they are lush, bright, and happy, yeah, that's not the case here. The abstract flower pot Ivan Seal painted almost looks like a skeleton, the skin, fat, and other layers burning away as the bare minimum begins to reveal itself. Ivan Seal's portrayal of decay is obvious here, but so too with the colors. A blanket your grandmother knitted for you long ago that is slowly but surely unwinding with each passing year. Even though she told you to never put it in the wash, you have done so a couple of times by accident. So that once bubblegum pink color is now a shell of what it used to be. Rusting cans and ancient tins that probably have a sewing kit inside, and a mustardy, less aesthetically pleasing olive color that would smell like army gear in a weathered battlefield. Similar to Stage 1, Stage 2's color palette still feels strikingly old and historic, but a tad more grim than what we saw in Stage 1. While Stage 1 felt like a photo album of better days, a charming nostalgia, Stage 2 is a bit more tangible. Its colors are reminiscent of fabrics, materials, and textures of aged objects, a tough realization of what happens to things under the clutches of Father Time and Mother Nature. A good chunk of people who listen to Everywhere at the End of Time find their favorite moments to be Stage 1 and Stage 2. This introductory section of the project is just gorgeous in texture. They're full of richness and history, sweeping drones that sprinkle our souls with a sense of comfort. It's a visit to the ballroom during its peak hours and the closest we'll ever get to what our grandparents refer to as the good old days. It's an incredibly inviting listen, and powerful in a good way. So my grandmother and I were sitting in the kitchen, and one thing my grandmother about her is that she loved doing these like latch hook art kits. I don't even know what to really call them. They're like stitch art or something. Yeah, whatever they're called. She would get these art books that were just full of them with these little templates, and she'd just sew through the numbers, and she would crank out these nature scenes or flowers or dogs and cats with like little hats on or something, and she'd hang them all over the house. So I'm sitting there at the kitchen table as she's watching the espresso over the stove, and I'm just kind of looking around her kitchen, kind of soaking in all these latch hook art pieces framed on the walls that she's done over the years that I've seen my whole life, ever since I'd visit her with my parents as a kid, but they kind of just blended into her wall after knowing they were there for so many years. But it was at this moment that I felt like I was actually looking at them for the first time. And I mean, it was nothing crazy to make, you just follow the pattern you're given until you've filled out the template. But there was such a pure innocence to it that at that moment, it just made the significance of my errands seem so stupid and worthless. It's kind of hard to explain, but it was the first time in a long time when visiting my grandparents that my mind seemed to just turn off and actually soak in what I was supposed to be there for, spending some time with them. And I was pretty lucky to be in my 20s and still have both sets of grandparents at this point, alive and fully intact. And I got this really weird feeling at that moment that she's going to pass away at some point, obviously. The chance for me to soak in everything about her, all the stories that she may have not been able to tell me, or maybe she did tell me them at one point, but I just wasn't paying attention, would end up be, forever locked away in a coffin. And I hate to sound grim, but this is what I was thinking at the time. I then turned to her after scanning through the countless amounts of these latch hook art pieces she had suffocating the wall, and I asked her, "Can you make me one of these?" And she just looked back so happy and said, "Of course I would." Stage 3. Here we are presented with some of the last coherent memories before confusion fully rolls in and the gray mists form and fade away. Finest moments have been remembered. The musical flow in places is more confused and tangled. As we progress, some singular memories become more disturbed, isolated, broken, and distant. These are the last embers of awareness before we enter the post-awareness stages. Stage 3 is known for being the last moments of our subject coming to terms with recognizing they have an issue going on inside of them. One thing you'll notice about Everywhere at the End of Time is that the length of the tracks become longer and longer as you venture deeper into the work. So even though the entirety of the 6 stages add up to about 6.5 hours of material, stage 3 just begins over an hour into the timeline of it all. Sample choices and loops are still recognizable, but slowly beginning to crumble. Instruments get whatever notes out that they shoot for, but are way weaker and noticeably more abrupt than the calm and rich presence we were graced with in stage 1. Everything feels sort of rushed, like a house is burning down and you're grabbing whatever objects or heirlooms you can before it's too late, except replace those objects with memories and a house with the brain. Songs have these bellowing clicks and thumping sounds on the low end of the mix. There is a presence lurking behind what the songs want us to hear, see, and feel. Some songs take a little bit to start up, as if the samples and instruments are tired and in need of catching their breath. The thick and cloudy feel I've mentioned present in part 1 and 2 of the work seems to have been completely popped, like a bubble, with textures scattering in all different directions throughout your headphones. Stage 3 just feels very confusing. Instruments all hanging off the edge of a cliff trying to climb over one another to safety, but they know now their world is inevitably tipping over. The chop job Kirby puts on, and I don't say that in a degrading way at all, is so full and commemorable. There is a serious attention to detail in this work that sets it apart from other audio collages out there. Everything is done for a reason, and it's all backed up by the chilling subject matter Kirby wishes to share with us. As of the making of this video, at this exact moment I record this audio, only one sample remains to be found for Stage 3, F1 Gradations of Arm's Length. Everything else has been discovered for the rest of the material in this section, so as of right now, Stage 3 does indeed remain incomplete. Maybe you'll be the one to figure it out. Go give it a shot when you can. And for the samples that are found, it is incredible going to look some of them up and comparing the originals with what Kirby ultimately did to them. F3 Internal Bewildered World takes a tune called Miserere, or Mercy, from the opera Il Trovatore. In this act, Kirby grabs the sample like dough and kneads it, expanding it larger and larger. Its growth in volume and atmosphere is horrifying. F8, Mournful Camaraderie, that Heartaches tune becoming oh too familiar by this point in the album, feels like a friend you've become so attached to that is now unfortunately nothing more than a hand sticking out for you to grab in this smoky, scattered mess we've found ourselves in. The sample is just begging for you to hold on to it, attempting to squeeze through only for it to abruptly come to a halt right before the explosive start of Stage 4. The artwork for Stage 3, once again, provides a stellar visual representation of the sound present in this moment of Everywhere at the End of Time. Here we have what seems to be a plant, at least to me, exploding at the ends. Everything that was once held is just now destroyed and it has nowhere to go. These memories that rested safe within the boundaries of your mind for years and years are now moving in directions beyond comprehension. We just can't fathom what it would be like to accept the mind running out of gas, and the artwork here details that beautifully. A plant does not look like this. Gravity should be holding down those leaves or whatever those things are that are snapping and lashing out all over the place. I mean, I don't even know what to call this. Is it a pot of roses? Spinach? Like, there's no answer, and that is the whole point of this. There is no answer, at least for the common mind that can think. While Stage 1 and Stage 2 have us dreaming of the past, Stage 3 is our subject waking up in a cold hospital bed, a reminder of the present. The most erratic and chaotic composition in the entire series, Seal explodes with vile greens on a blue background, a blue whose personality matches the same cold, worrisome blue of a doctor's garments. This is the first time in the series we are presented with an abstract composition instead of recognizable and clearly distinctive objects like we saw in Stage 1 and Stage 2. And yeah, I know Stage 2 might not be exactly a real object, but you can tell what it is. And Stage 3's color selection as well just adds on to this change to a more abstract composition with a far more hearty, vivid, and sort of disgusting, outer worldly color palette. Harsh black tones that signify a rotting state, chemical and nuclear greens being the numerous amounts of pills and medications you are required to swallow, and that ominous, distant blue that can send chills down anyone's spine. These colors are vomiting out of this unidentifiable situation. Like I've said already, I'm not sure if it's a plant that has exploded or something, but whatever it is seems to be untamable. Our situation has hit a breaking point, beyond a breaking point, and it's up to the doctors to get it all back under control. But as we all know, that is never a guarantee. Between the releases of Stage 3 and Stage 4, the Caretaker would release Take Care, It's a Desert Out There, a 48-minute long track from the Caretaker, all done in memory of and for the writer Mark Fisher, who passed away earlier in that year. The release is far more minimal than what we were seeing from the Caretaker at the time, a departure from the auditory progression of Everywhere at the End of Time. This quest into cavernous sounds feels like one gigantic sweeping drone. Ever since he wrote the extensive liner notes for the Caretaker's theoretically pure anterograde amnesia box set in 2005, Mark Fisher was instrumental in contextualizing the complex, abstract nature of the Caretaker's music to beguiled listeners across the world. The Caretaker's work, including this billowing new long-form piece, has always resonated with and fed into Fisher's ideas, so we could hardly think of a more fitting send-off from Leyland Kirby's cherished vessel. On December 8th of 2017, James Leyland Kirby and Ivan Seal would hold a live performance at the Barbican in London. At this event titled Unsound Dislocation, James would give out 1,800 copies of Take Care, It's a Desert Out There to the audience members for free, while 350 signed copies were sold out via Boomcat, an independent online record store that has held a home for many of Leyland Kirby's releases in physical form. Unfortunately, there is no official footage of the performance, and all that exists currently is an incomplete 2-part recording with pretty bad quality, and there are some snippets of higher quality footage on Instagram that you can find. At the performance, Kirby and Seal would share the stage, sitting in leather armchairs with some whiskey in front of the visual display accompanied by the music. Something interesting to note, however, is that segments of the performance contain songs used later again in stages of Everywhere at the End of Time, specifically stage 5. And furthermore, the artwork for Take Care, It's a Desert Out There is almost virtually identical or in the same plane as the artwork for stage 5 as well. The visuals on screen flash us through visual states and fixations as a camera pans through a mansion house, distorted by corrupting images that blink across the screen. The piece is centered upon misremembering, how the deep space of dementia starts to eat into our thoughts and break apart any grip on reality. So, about a week after I asked my grandmother to make me one of these art pieces, I went back to her house. My grandmother and I decided I would take her to the craft store down the road and let her grab whatever supplies she needed to make this thing a reality. I knew I wanted her to make me something music related. I didn't want to, fully tell her what to do, but kind of just give her some sort of ballpark, I guess. And I swear, I cannot be the only one who thinks this, but grandparents must have some sort of protocol set in place every time you ring that doorbell. They are always ready to go in position. Every time I'd, ring the bell, door would open, boom. I'm hit with the smell of espresso brewing on the stove. My grandfather slumped in the background on his couch, watching the latest Inter Milan game or the Italian news. I really feel like it was a stage, and every time I just ring the doorbell, they would go into character. So my grandmother and I, we flipped through all the old books of designs she gathered over the decades of doing this stuff, eventually landing on a page that we both knew right away would be the one. It was a portrait of an angel floating in the clouds, playing this guitar violin-looking thing. It had this beautiful ribbon flowing through all of the elements in the piece, a ribbon that the book said to make pink, but I remember my grandmother saying she'd want to do it in gold as it would pop out a little bit better. She was really excited and started setting up her little workstation as if she wanted to tell me, leave so she can get right to work. So I took down that espresso like swallowing a pill and shortly made my way to my car. And that's when that dreadful feeling started to hit me again. I knew deep down I was doing this as a way to have something to remember my grandmother by once she would eventually pass away. This token to maybe remind myself that, hey, look, you did this thing, you made her happy, and you spent time with her. But it kind of, in the end, at least to me, it felt like I was just doing something for myself, just to have this object, once the time passed and she wasn't here anymore. And I just felt selfish. I felt really selfish. 2 weeks later, I went back after kind of forgetting about it being made, and it was done. And let me tell you, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life.
Everywhere at the End of Time is a unique experience. I'd go as far as say it's a powerful journey. When I first listened to this, I was going through some immense changes in my life, and it was a really difficult time for me. I was thinking about the happy memories that I've had. You're happy that you've had them, but at the same time, you're sad that it's gone. It's like you're nostalgic, but you're also melancholic. Those days are behind you. The people are leaving. Everything is slowly going away. And in the end, it's becoming nothing more than faint memories. And you have to come to grips with that. It doesn't take long for that melancholy to turn into fear. In the beginning, it was a floating sensation, but now you're falling. You're falling into a bottomless pit. Whatever you still have is slipping away from your own grip.
Stage 4. Post-awareness stage 4 is where serenity and the ability to recall singular memories gives way to confusions and horror. It's the beginning of an eventual process where all memories begin to become more fluid through entanglements, repetition, and rupture. Stage 4 is when hell finally becomes a reality. The last second of Stage 3 and the first second of Stage 4 are two worlds apart. The Caretaker slicing away everything we've been hearing with only the sharpest of knives in one diabolical cut. Everything we were feeling for 2 hours is just gone in an instant. Instead of hyper-descriptive song names sprinkled with the charms of historical context and blissful memories, we're now in a heavily structured system of procedures and protocols. Every track from this stage is worded as some sort of diagnosis. The first track of Stage 4 going as Post-Awareness Confusions. It's as if the songs from the first 3 stages were titled by the subject themselves, only for it now to become the job of the doctor or nurse or even their children. This is also where track times become drastically longer, with all of them, starting in Stage 4, being at least 20 minutes long in length. This is, in my opinion, and I think it's not even my opinion, it's just clearly there, the moment of this entire piece. This is the one moment where you can notice the most significant change in tone, that change up from Stage 3 ending and Stage 4 starting. For an over 6 hour long piece, it is difficult to navigate or pinpoint when things start to go sour at the exact second they happen. But this horrifying cut between Stage 3 and Stage 4 is impossible to ignore and comes as a shock. Something to add here that I feel adds to the proper experience of listening to Everywhere at the End of Time in its entirety is to make sure you're not watching the track list play through as you listen to it. It'll kind of ruin the intensity of this moment if you know Stage 3 is about to end and Stage 4 is around the corner. Horns are foggier than ever and scrambling for any sort of air, and traditional sample loops are just a figment of the past. Ominous, stretched drone work has crept on in and is now at free roam behind whatever sounds are left standing, contorted as they may be. The devilish clutch of the disease is here now, like quicksand with absolutely no way out. And denial is a joke, and just like the tracks are having you recognize, it's only a matter of time now until you see nothing but black. But how long will that take? Kirby's signature horn samples become sliced up and reconfigured into disturbing new shapes or stretched to their absolute limit like pale branches reaching skyward out of a murky bog. There is an utter sense of worry and collapse in Stage 4. That second track specifically sounds like a bunch of horns and trumpets running around with their heads chopped off. Kirby's determination to bring you somewhere soaked in paranoia is vicious. 3 out of the 4 tracks on here are deeper than a trench. It's like you've fallen into a well and you are now fixated on the small hole of light coming from above. It's the only salvation left. The sounds feel so thick and weighted, your whole world plummeted at the very bottom. And this is all done with a very precise mixdown on Kirby's part. Everything is brooding and lurking in the lows and the low mids, while the sharpest noises, if anything, are the murky synths or merely the simple white noise of the elongated cracks and pops of weathered or deteriorated audio equipment. However, we still haven't lost complete consciousness yet. Tracks like I-1, Temporary Bliss State, is our only window of hope, nestling itself between the 3 darker tracks. It has you constantly trying to decide if there is maybe a music box playing or some wind chime or something, but every time you think you've come up with a reasonable answer, that sound is pounded back down into oblivion. You have barely any time to make a conscious decision, but you know something is there, and you want to grab it, you want to feel it, hold it, know if it's warm or freezing, you just want to know something, anything at all at this point. The concision of previous stages is here replaced with wandering side-along tracks. 3 of those are titled Post-Awareness Confusions and correspondingly explore and reflect agitated mindsets as they navigate an ephemeral, confusing complexity of structures. The other piece is called Temporary Bliss State and starkly contrasts the other parts in a coherently lush traverse of ambient crackle and glittering melody. We are losing common logic and sense really fast here. Things that should be easy to recognize, like a human figure or face, are now muddied out and melting away before we even have time to comprehend the situation. Earthier tones are brought to life in Stage 4, and a canvas muddier than anything we've ever seen previously. A portrait of a melting mess, Ivan Seal chooses colors that showcase the bare necessities of what we can recognize on this planet. So forget about nostalgia or even traditional objects or items. We've now entered a world that is vacant of anything that can trigger a memory. So let's take a look at the barren terrain in front of us. Rich blue spices and powders clumped into a mass, the void of still water out at open sea under a gray sky, and then earthy substance of your choice, whether that be clay, mud, soil, you name it. Stage 4 is all about stepping away from the fine lines and seeing things as just one universal color. That powder seems to be one bright tone or shade of blue, but when you look closer, you can see the cracks, shadows, and individual pieces that all mesh together to create that one singular color our eyes lazily choose to see. The color choices and paint style in general of Stage 4 represent the inability to declare detail and instead just summarizing it all as one color. I mean, look at the artwork. From first glance, it seems to have maybe 3 or perhaps 4 colors at most, right? But when you give it a serious scan and take a couple seconds to graze your eyes over it, there are more colors than what our eyes tell us at first glance. This concept of just ignoring individual colors and just generalizing it all as one color, it can be pretty existential at times. You know, you're driving on a road and the trees are green, but are they really? What about all the light greens in there and the dark greens and everything in between? Stage 4 and its muddy composition and colors replicate the struggle to make a decision and the state of confusion everywhere at the end of time finds itself to be in at this point. Stage 4 is where the sample work of James Leyland Kirby gets absolutely crazy. Looking at that massive sample document, you can see just how wild it gets. For example, take a look at H1 post-awareness confusions. Individual sections of tracks need to be broken down in order to be archived as specific samples pop in here and there. Moments from previous Caretaker works also come into play here, like false memory syndrome from 2008 and things that are beautiful and transient from 2016. The entire universe of the Caretaker, beyond everywhere at the end of time, has shred and ripped into one another, all of it spiraling down into the abyss. A week after my grandmother finished the angel art she made for me, we got the news that she was diagnosed with cancer. It came as a shock to all of us, obviously, but as usual, she was her same old self, smiling and telling people, don't worry, I'm fine, and whatnot. But deep down, I knew she was a bit scared. But most grandmothers would rather give their loved ones a disguised comfort instead of revealing their true emotions. It's some pretty powerful stuff when you think about it. The day we all found out about her cancer, she seemed perfectly healthy, but that all changed very quickly. Like most people will tell you, cancer is just ruthless. It was only about 2 or 3 months until she was completely bedridden, and trips to her house became this session of me sitting next to her as she just laid on the couch. She didn't speak much anymore, and this is when my grandmother began to change. The last few weeks of her life, or at least before she went to the hospital for the final time, there was this horrible energy in her eyes. She looked so mad and angry all the time. Anytime anyone would try to talk to her, she'd just look at you, and she just seemed so absolutely disgusted. I don't know. Maybe I only noticed it, but this is what hurt me the most because my grandmother was just so unbelievably happy and inviting all of the other years I knew her. And I thought maybe in these final times, she'd be giving me this advice or amazing words of wisdom or valuable moments I'd tell my kids about in the future. But I started to realize that's all movie bullshit. Death is pretty terrifying when you know it's coming. Stage 5. Post-awareness Stage 5 confusions and horror. More extreme entanglements, repetition, and rupture can give way to calmer moments. The unfamiliar may sound and feel familiar. Time is often spent only in the moment leading to isolation. Stage 4 and Stage 5 share a similar sort of bond to Stage 1 and Stage 2. Both have the same motions or underbelly as the other, but the latter is heightened in such a way that it manages to stand apart from the previous stage in a more menacing way. Stage 5 is definitely more roaring and extreme, like Kirby had described to us, than Stage 4, with an even more deformed entanglement of samples and drone work pancaking on top of one another. We're left with this sonic combination that sounds almost like demonic, unclear vocals, growls, and cries, all given to us as if someone in the distance is trying to tell you something that you just can't respond to. The sounds constantly flood into your ears, eyes, nose, and mouth. You're buried alive, and the coffin is snapped, with sand and dirt filling into every available centimeter of the space around you. There's really no such thing as instruments anymore once we get to the 5th stage. Even on the last track of Stage 5, which is clearly the most calm of the bunch, and one sudden time regression into isolation, it's still almost impossible to make out any proper sounds or instruments. Even the sweeping drone work feels off its rocker at this point. Pockets of old recordings emerge out of the short circuitry, but they're only around for a short time before the door closes. Speech is incomprehensible, its syllables cut short and discontinued, tossed around in the mix like rotting word salad. Memories and muffled melodies emanate from the other side of the door, but it never opens. The chop job I mentioned earlier that was happening around Stage 3 is still here, but doesn't have the same benefit sonically. What once was quite tasteful is now standing before us as a muddy, thick shroud of debris that fills the harsher sections of these really long and painful tracks. What may seem like a big jumble of grumbling, eerie terrain is really just bindings of everything we once heard in the hours before, all produced in such a bizarre way that it becomes unrecognizable. There are no more colors you are imagining, no more textures or anything like that. The only contrasting features that seem to be left in these tracks are the sudden moments of calmness, the distorted stress becoming too much to handle that will momentarily arrive in these rooms barren of anything. The artwork of Stage 5 may be my favorite of the whole bunch. The muted pearlescent paint job stands out compared to the mostly earthy or historic tones found in the majority of the other covers in the series. It's also compositionally just mesmerizing to look at, isn't it? To me, it looks like a lady in a big dress walking down a flight of stairs to a cocktail party. Maybe it's the leader of a parade marching down the street as the triumphant band plays behind them. If we look at Stage 5 as a portrait of a memory of a specific person, just like we do in Stage 4, we can see the artwork representing the growth in intensity from the music going from Stage 4 to 5. Everything this time around is even more muddier, more unclear, more disastrous, and melting away, splotched with the fate of memory loss. Stage 5 is the last glimpse of sanity, looking back in the darkness and seeing a circle of color getting smaller and smaller as you're venturing down a black hole. It is the last attempt to create something tangible, hence why we think we can see something in the image here. Ivan gives us fragments of delicate colors we once knew. We see very faint moments of docile celadons, memories of furniture that have now gone astray. The home you've made and the couch you've sat on for the last 3 years as your memory begins to crumble, something you've seen every day, is now somehow fading away as well. The most beautiful pink color ever presented to the human eye, an object so sentimental and significant to your life, a wedding shoe you were so taken back by when window shopping it for the first time. Old and sun-faded jewelry, why not throw that into the mix as well? Who would have thought value or your most expensive items would vanish not from being stolen by someone breaking into your house, but from your brain, not being able to just keep up with it all? These are arguably my favorite colors in the entire series. It represents the minuscule pops of memory attempting to stick its head out of the mess for one last breath of fresh air, one last time. The muddiness of Stage 4 has imploded and is now attempting to restructure itself, but clearly it is not working at all. Color suffocation really is how I like to think of this palette. Stage 5 strips more than objects from our minds or places and people we once knew. It's the downfall of even the things we hold subconsciously, our personalities, our egos, our desires to even have desires. These are the most brutal moments of mental decay, or at least in how Kirby presents it musically, before we're left with nothing but nothingness. It feels as though our skull is being scraped out, uncovering hellish layers of accreted sensation and mulched imagery, occasionally recognizing calmer patterns, only for them to fray into the ether before it's possible to parse and dwell on them. Oh, and don't even get me started on the monstrosity that is the explanation of sample usage for Stage 5. If you want to see some incredible archiving, you best go check out this damn sample document because holy cow, this is something to behold. This is absolutely astonishing. That first track, K1 Advanced Plaque Entanglements, for example, needs to be broken down into 9 individual sections, with some of those sections containing up to almost a dozen different sample selections from previous Kirby works to even more outsourced relics of the past. Just like the disarray of the final product and the music itself, the sample document is a complex and towering beast to be tamed. Two days before my grandmother passed away, I spent a couple of hours with her in the hospital after everyone else went home for the day. At this point, she wasn't talking at all anymore. Her eyes were barely opening, but she was still definitely there. It was really sad. Obviously, there's no other way to put it. Seeing someone all hooked up to the machines, knowing there are still so many stories inside of them that they may have never had the chance to let out. I thought of the fact that maybe, if she was coherent at this very moment and could speak or just tell me something, she'd be able to say something that would benefit my life greatly, some piece of advice I could never think of as a person who wasn't dying. I was thinking of myself again. I sat for what seemed to be hours holding her hand, and I thought about how different our two lives were. I would run around trying to knock out 1,000 things in a day that I thought were important, while she would just sit at home making these little cross-stitch art pieces, throwing on some water for the pasta, cleaning the house all day long, or just sitting there, hoping for the doorbell to ring. I started to worry that I missed out on her teaching me the importance of simplicity, something that would have benefited me then and, without a doubt, would benefit me today. The power to put your work, projects, and dreams aside, to just soak in what you already have. When work began on this series, it was difficult to predict how the music would unravel itself. Dementia is an emotive subject for many, and always a subject I have treated with maximum respect. Stages have all been artistic reflections of specific symptoms which can be common with the progression and advancement of the different forms of Alzheimer's. Thanks always for your support of this series of works remembered by the Caretaker. A conclusion presented in its most stripped, raw, and brutal form, a wasteland so barren that even the slight crackle or pop is refreshing to hear. The Caretaker presents this last stop of the 3-year-long plunge with 4 final tracks, all combining to clock in at about an hour and a half or so of material. These soundscapes contain so much unidentifiable pressure that you can't tell if you are listening to something gigantic or incredibly insignificant and just empty. For those who make it this far into Everywhere at the End of Time, it's so surreal looking back at the journey you've just traveled, witnessing in audio form the sound gradually eating itself alive over the past 5 hours or so. Released on March 14th, 2019, Kirby's final installation raises the question of whether or not you even want to go through with this anymore. Your ears are so drained that continuing may just seem like pure sabotage at this point. After progressing through the void of stages 4 and 5, we've now entered a zone of pure darkness. Even though you can't really see anything, the textures are plenty, Kirby bringing extremely rough, cruddy, and harsh surfaces to the forefront with these enormous echoing sounds. This is seen mostly in the second track of Stage 6, P1, A Brutal Bliss Beyond This Empty Defeat. I think this, in my opinion, is the darkest track of this whole experience. Imagine how crushing that must be. Brutal bliss. Whatever it must feel like, I think Kirby gets us as close as possible to that experience through sound. After that brutal bliss track, it starts to feel as if maybe the worst is over. We've descended so far down, and now we're at some sort of definitive bottom. This follow-up track, Q1 Long Decline is Over, isn't as harsh as the previous one and actually has some tangible instruments present despite how faint they may be. You'll find random, sporadic moments of crashing piano chords and keys that seem completely drowned out in water. Nothing has ever felt so distant before, so emptied out. It's like when moving from a house you've lived in for so long. All of the furniture and objects that made that house a home is removed, and now you're left with this barren shell of what used to be. The removal of these items you've gotten so accustomed to now reveals the shredded wallpaper and cobwebs that laid behind it this entire time. There's nothing really left to search for here. Yes, the long decline may be over, but this isn't where our journey ends in Everywhere at the End of Time. This is when the Caretaker gives us our final track. R1, Place in the World, fades away. In these final moments, we are given this warm organ from the depths of whatever is left here. There is a refreshing feeling of some sort of ascension. We're reminded what goes down must eventually come up, and it's clear to see this as the representation of our subject finally passing away after a brutal battle, and now beginning to ascend to an afterlife. These warm and comforting sweeps of pianos and shy textures go on for some time, all eventually fading out as a more clear and pristine organ starts to slowly creep on in. It's the first time in a long time that you feel like you're hearing something you understand again. The beauty in these last stages of Everywhere at the End of Time is that you notice how much you miss something as simple as a tangible instrument or sample after being stripped of them for so long. It's euphoric, it's breathtaking, ethereal, heavenly, and it's a clever buildup of contrast Kirby has been brewing for the past two stages, all to make you realize how important it is to enjoy what we have and not to take things for granted. A couple of moments pass by, this shining light dangling itself in front of you, and then, out of nowhere, it stops. This is, in my opinion, the most chilling moment through all of Everywhere at the End of Time. I remember hearing this for the first time and got straight up shivers down my entire body. I had no idea what possibly could happen next. Were we about to nosedive right back down? Or was Kirby going to deliver us with something even more jubilant? You sit there waiting for something to happen, and it feels like forever. The very dull, snowy static that is present is the only sound left. This bed of rice Kirby is about to lay the final course on top of, and whatever that may be. And before you know it, a sample begins to play. It's kind of hard to make out at first, but slowly you'll start to piece it together. A piano, some strings, and these vocals. This choir sample that is so beautiful yet so unsettling at the same time. Everything feels so hollow and delicate. It's the sight of an angel coming down from above, a light so bright your eyes can barely take it. This sample eventually plays itself out, like a candle begging to be melted, as you and I are left with about a minute's worth of pure silence. It's all over now. Understanding the experience of a decaying mind is the equivalent of imagining a new color. It's impossible. Ivan Seal's color selection for Stage 6 mimics the inevitable comparison perfectly. There's nothing left. There's no concrete, visible stimuli, no abstract explosion, no muddy messes. Every other composition up to this point was exciting in some sort of way, but here we are presented with a literal dead end. We can't go any further. Whatever is on the other side, we're just not meant to see as the listener. The back of an old frameless painting removed from a wall on an aged olive green backdrop. It's almost as if we're returning to the color palette of the first stage in the entire series, except while everything there was a bit more innocent and delicate in tone, comforting colors that remind you of maybe your old bedroom from childhood or your grandparents' front porch, these colors in Stage 6 just feel dirtier, gloomier, and heavier than their original state in Stage 1. A gross, rancid brown, the folded up chairs of a baseball stadium with nothing left to see, and an insect's blurry vision of being trapped in a spider's web in the middle of a garden. Just like Kirby giving us one last clearly distinguishable choir sample used in the last track of Stage 6, place in the world fades away, the colors and compositions here also give us one final glimpse of something concrete before the mind fades away. Stage 4 and Stage 5 struggle to give us music or artwork that are recognizable, but Stage 6 is where we are given one last chance to revisit everything we've been through, despite how limited that chance may be. Kirby gives us one final, faint yet recognizable audio sample, while Seal gives us an object that we can at least universally decide is a tangible object. He also gives us colors that remind us of previous colors, earlier memories where we knew the colors were lighter and homier, but this is the best we're going to get of them at this point. I think Kirby and Seal collectively believe there has to be one final moment in this horrific process of memory loss, one brief period of time where we get a last chance to see something. That chance, though, it's not for you or I yet, thankfully, nor Ivan Seal or James Leyland Kirby. It's for the person who has struggled with so much for so long, losing everything in a long and gruesome battle. We just have to accept we can't see the actual significance on the other side of this board until maybe it's finally our time. Visiting my grandparents' house these days is kind of sad. It feels empty, even though I still have my grandfather there. My grandmother was the one who really brought the house to life. Her amazing cooking, stories of the old country, and how her and her sister never thought they would have adjusted to American life once arriving in the States. Her presence just made the house sing, and I do miss it a lot. Everything is really the same there too. Her clothes are still all hung up in her closet, her makeup sitting inside the bathroom mirror, and those latch hook art pieces still hanging up on that wall. Being there now, I feel like those things are her eyes. She's able to look after the place and still have a chance to see her loved ones whenever they stop on by. This is the piece my grandmother made for me. It was the last thing she made before she got sick, and it's all because I took the time to, for once, not be in a rush when visiting her house. It makes me wonder what else could have came out of being a bit more attentive and selfless when visiting her over the last couple of years, or for that sake, visiting anywhere or anyone in the world. What is that perfect blend of chasing your dreams and putting your priorities to the side? Attending to your calling while still being able to visit family, dedicating time with loved ones, and reconnecting with those you may have spread apart from. It's something I'm still on the hunt to figure out. I consider myself to be a workaholic, and sometimes I think I may be letting some of the simple yet beautiful moments of my life pass right by me because of it. It's a bittersweet kind of situation, and maybe I'll never find that answer or know how to go about it perfectly, but my grandmother will always live through this angel to remind me that all it really takes sometimes is a simple dedication of your time to someone else.
With Everywhere at the End of Time, James Leyland Kirby shattered the typical boundaries of the auditory medium and delivered an experience like no other. With the first 3 stages, Kirby builds a mental construct which establishes a bond between the listener and the initial big band 1930s melodies, which he then slowly deteriorates through the latter stages, causing the listener to be unable to recall the prior melodies, creating an effect with parallels to the ailment he's depicting. This psychological technique forces the listeners of this project to consider a fate which they might not have considered prior. I believe I speak unanimously when I say we all fear death, the absolute end. But to have lived a full life, to have created beautiful and meaningful memories spanning decades, and to have that all torn away, to have your memories, your identity, your very existence as an individual torn away from you, in a fashion akin to a sort of mental decomposition, that is truly terrifying. What are you if not for your thoughts and experiences? While it may sound bleak, torturous even, this project manages to give you a newfound appreciation for the times you've had, and the times you hold dear. The fact that all of this can be snatched away from you, the legacies you hold, the times you've treasured, the person that you've developed into, all of this says to me one thing. You absolutely must live your life the way you want, to experience the world with an appreciation for its fleeting beauty.
As mentioned in the beginning of this video, Kirby would drop another release on the very same day of Stage 6, a collection of lonely, mysterious songs dedicated to the fans as a surprise golden farewell. This odd yet beautiful little gift is called Everywhere and Empty Bliss. 17 tracks that, when looking back at them now and hearing them resonate, almost feel like a sort of after the ending credits scene to Everywhere at the End of Time. I like to picture the setting of this album to be the funeral of the person who had finally passed away, a gathering of the friends and the family coming together to remember their loved one once more. Tracks that were once overindulged in previous Caretaker works reappear again in this final Caretaker release. However, this time, the reappearing samples are more simplified and less euphoric or grand. For example, the 9-second long I Might Be Vanishing takes the seemingly never-ending version of the same sample loop found in An Empty Bliss Beyond This World, from a track of a very similar name, I Feel As If I Might Be Vanishing, and just cuts all the magical texturizing and warmth Kirby laid onto the sample originally. Instead of constantly repeating that beautiful little sweeping loop over and over again like how it was done in An Empty Bliss, this time it's just a brief and more lo-fi version of that sample, just played one single time. Looking at the two track titles and how they are established, one seems like some very basic dialogue, maybe spoken by a grandchild at the funeral who doesn't really understand the situation and just wants to go home, while the other is very proper and storytelling-like, a concept that is always reflected in Caretaker tracks, this idea of some sort of subject telling you a story of their past. Everywhere An Empty Bliss is another personal favorite Kirby release of mine. It features a wide variety of diverse sounds and moods that are definitely refreshing, especially after sitting through something like stages 4 through 6, for example. That first track on here, Loss of Want Back There, is just chilling. There's no other way to put it. It's so beautiful yet so eerie at the same time. Those lonesome horns and distant environments created through Kirby's production feel as if the world is ending and you and your family are now glued to your television as a broadcast shows instructions on the screen of what to do next, all while different images of mountains and forests slideshow in the background. It's all something that wants to come off as hopeful, but it's so easy to see that you're inevitably doomed. The tracklist can also get extremely dark and convoluted at times. Tracks like Plaque Advanced Despair are just a mess. This pile of mush or sludge that is eroding away any surface it comes in contact with. Broken horns and brooding low ends intoxicate your ears as you wonder, what is this thing? The track Glimpses of Life Denial also features some dialogue, something definitely a bit rare in the Caretaker series, and the final track, And Bliss Everywhere Bliss, brings back the feelings the project started off with, more somber and reflective tones through a sound that is unsettling yet hopeful at the same time, and truly feels like the proper send-off to our good old friend, the Caretaker. Work on Everywhere at the End of Time was all-consuming, as you can imagine. All work and no play, all work and no play. In celebration of its completion and only for a limited time, here is a surprise golden farewell. Compliments of the House. Offering you one last chance to raise a charged glass for those we lost along the way, for all the works, for those ghosts from our past, for our uncertain future, and for the Caretaker. You are, of course, welcome to purchase me a drink if you find this work to be of personal value. As the old saying goes, I'm the type of guy who likes to know who's buying their drinks, Lloyd. Thanks eternally for your support. There is a reason so many of us on the internet make content exploring Everywhere at the End of Time. Almost all of us know what it's about at this point. There are so many videos out there about the project, but the sounds Kirby shares with us grip us in a way that excites our imagination to no end. It's impossible to not share our own thoughts and feelings for what this project has brought to us each individually. And I always just want to dive in more and more into it. I can never get enough. Sometimes when I listen to Everywhere at the End of Time, I think about what life will be like when my friends and I are all older in our 70s, 80s, or 90s, hopefully, if we get that far. What will we talk about then? Who will even be left? It's kind of scary to think about, but our eagerness to answer unanswerable questions will always spark the human mind. And what better project to do that with than the Caretaker. Kirby's work has hit a chord with so many people and just continues to draw curious musicgoers in with the lore that surrounds it. In the next chunk of this deep dive, I want to explore some of the fascinating things that have happened since the release of Everywhere at the End of Time, the ripple effect that has caused a diverse blend of fan-made projects to come to life, as well as the out-of-this-world search to discover every single sample used throughout the entire Caretaker catalog. Trust me, you're going to want to brew another cup of coffee for this and stay a while, because we are also going to get into that insane search for the final samples in Stage 6 of Everywhere at the End of Time. A story that is evolving every single day as the Caretaker community gets closer and closer to cracking the code. Let's dive in. From 8-bit recreations of individual songs to a compilation featuring over 90 different artists in one spot, everyone seems to want to pay some sort of tribute to the Caretaker by creating their own spin to the tale, themes, and aura of Kirby's most popular work. Featured on Fact magazine and curated by the vaporwave legend Mesh in 2017, Memories Overlooked, a tribute to the Caretaker, is a collaborative effort that features over 90 different artists coming together to pay tribute to the visionary works of James Leyland Kirby, in particular, the Caretaker project. As the Bandcamp page for the release states, the compilation was diagnosed with having early onset dementia and is mixed and arranged in accordance with the advancement of the disease. What started as simply a compilation for the fans by the fans would shortly become a bit more sentimental as numerous submissions started to come in from artists whose family members also battled with dementia. There are some heavy hitters on this thing, some really familiar names if you are a fan of the vaporwave scene. Power PCME, Cat System Corp, Hexadecimal, Encarta 95, even our very own James Webster is on this thing under his HCMJ alias. 100% of the digital proceeds from the compilation were donated to the Alzheimer's Association, who for 37 years have been advancing research to end Alzheimer's and dementia while enhancing care for those living with the disease. Nowhere at the Millennium of Space, or commonly abbreviated to NATMOS, is an open source fan project of the Caretakers Everywhere at the End of Time, with the main difference being the years of the samples used. While Everywhere at the End of Time uses samples from the 1910s to the 1940s, Nowhere at the Millennium of Space uses songs from the 1960s to the 2000s. Essentially a more modern-day swing on Everywhere at the End of Time, NATMOS is a musical expression of dementia created by many fans of the Caretaker project. NATMOS combines this concept with having the patient remember more modern songs, and being afflicted by dementia in modern, possibly future times. Currently, any and all contributions and submissions towards the project are wanted. Submissions are sent through the NATMOS and Caretaker Discord server.
Hello everyone, Jordan Keurig here. I am the director and founder of the series known as Nowhere at the Millennium of Space, otherwise known as NATMOS. The concept of NATMOS is to take the general sample range of Everywhere at the End of Time and flip it on its head, using samples from the late 60s to early 2010s. New installments are developed in the Caretaker Fan Project's Discord, and you can find us through Discord. All installments are a culmination of the work of many people, myself included, and sometimes management can even be outsourced to other directors, a prominent example being my good friend the Caretaker. To me, NATMOS was always to pay homage to the Caretaker with music that sticks with people more than newer generations. A lot of times I'd find myself using samples I felt close to, and I'm sure many others felt the same. Everywhere at the End of Time completely shifted my perspective on music, and I'm sure it did the same for many others, which is why I made the project open sourced and collaboration based. From the start to now, this project has been made to bring a shift to the subgenre of ambient that the Caretaker sort of popularized and create an experience that's like End of Time, but with music the average listener will have more attachment to. I guess that's what gives it a punch. The idea that this may be a person close to you or you in the distant future is a dark one, and it sort of drove me into a pit compiling the mastering of the later stages. It was absolutely great to see it through. Watching the follower and contributor reaction to each release is special in a way that only a team effort could be, and I'm glad to have started this project to ever begin with. Funny thing is, Natmos started as a parody project. I was taking samples I felt sappily nostalgic for and warping them for fun. But after speaking to Departure, who accompanied me for the start and end of the project, I shifted the project into a crowd-made serious project. And I can say that was one of the best decisions I've ever made. From summer last year to now, this project and community has given me hope like no other, and has generally been my favorite community I've ever interacted with, really. We began in July of 2020, I believe it was July 5th, and are still moving to this day. The final installment of the first and most well-known of our projects, Natmos itself, came out on January 16, 2021. Furthermore, considering I know this video may open up a wider eye to this project, I'm here to help in any sort of copyright dispute. My email is available on my website, which you can find through the Fan Project Discord or my YouTube channel. We don't mean to violate anyone's rights using these samples, and nobody has ever made a penny off of any of our projects. Thank you all for watching and listening. This has been Jordan Curing, and I'm out.
This is, you guessed it, an entire rework of the compositions found in the popular sandbox video game Minecraft. Clocking in at just over 75 minutes long, this project explores the various tracks found throughout the terrain of Minecraft, all with a classic Caretaker twist. The artwork for each stage is also redone in that blocky Minecraft style, a cheeky touch I think James himself would have a chuckle at. The creator, Super Accordion Dude or Supra on YouTube, originally planned on buying the Minecraft Volume Alpha and Beta vinyl records, messing them up with a little bit of dirt, dust, distortion, etc., and then sample them in the same vein as Leyland Kirby did with his work. I was working in Logic just by myself, with every track all in the one project, so the final project was massive. The production side was actually a really unusual process. I was listening to the Caretakers Everywhere at the End of Time repeatedly during this process, trying to nail as much as I could in terms of flow and mimicking production. Supra began working on this album almost immediately after they completed their first project, Minecraft, but it's an empty bliss beyond this world. As of the making of this video, Minecraft, but it's everywhere at the end of time, has over 500,000 hits on YouTube and continues to grow in size each and every day. For the reception and bizarre amount of popularity this project of mine achieved, I'm kind of in a few minds about it. When I started the first album, I had this idea after playing Sweden on an old toy keyboard hooked up to a bad amp and effects setup, and it just sounded so horrific, like the music was suffering. I had, at that point, been familiar with the Caretaker's work and had listened to it quite a bit, but not actively, which I think is why I struggled to capture the essence of his work in the first album, because at that point it was just an imagining of what I thought his work was like. See, the thing with Minecraft, especially its soundtrack, is that it's this sharp, biting experience of nostalgia. It's this fierce burning of yearning to go back to a simpler time. It's so odd, and to anyone who doesn't understand what I mean, would sound quite ridiculous. I felt like the Caretaker's work would finally be the vehicle to which I could express this intense feeling and make it tangible and experiential. As mentioned multiple times while venturing through each stage of Everywhere at the End of Time with you, there is a massive group effort within the Caretaker community right now aiming to discover every single sample used by Kirby throughout his works as the Caretaker. To give you an inside look at just how in-depth and detailed this hunt has become, I want you to say hello to Mr. Mister, who is the creator of the sample hunt document, moderator of the Caretaker Discord server, as well as the architect behind the Caretaker wiki that is currently in the works.
Hey y'all, Mr. Mister here. You can just call me Mister for short. If you don't know me already, I'm the current one who's been spearheading this whole operation, verifying any new samples found, as well as being the creator of the Caretaker fandom wiki, as well as the now defunct Google Docs. Originally, for this portion of the video, I was going to talk for the entire duration. However, I felt that I didn't represent the sample finding aspect of the community well enough, and opted to bring some of the people who I view as having made important contributions to finding samples, whether it be recent or many years ago. This portion of the video will be split into two main parts. The first portion will focus on the various techniques that us sample providers employ while finding samples, as well as the community itself. The second portion will focus on how we found the melody, as well as the choir behind the last 6 minutes of Place in the World Fades Away, otherwise known as Friends Past Reunited.
Hello everybody, I am Person Man. I've been finding samples for around a year now. I joined the Caretaker Discord server in late June of 2020, and I instantly became fascinated with the prospect of samples, and how many of them were unidentified. I thought it would be a fun challenge to try and help find some of the samples, and for the past year, that's exactly what I've been doing.
Hi everyone, Michael Clayton here. I should start by saying how I discovered the Caretaker. It all began when I went to see William Basinski play in my hometown of Lisbon. At the time, I was already a big fan of ambient music, which had become a recent passion of mine, and Basinski was one of the genre's luminaries. And some days after the show, I went back to my favorite record store, and the owner, knowing that I liked ambient so much, showed me Patience after Sebald, which was very similar to the loop-based melancholic songs of Basinski. So I was instantly hooked, and his music accompanied me when I went to live in New York the following year in 2013. That summer, I began to delve more into sampling, and I discovered who sampled and began contributing to it. In fact, some of the very first samples I registered were songs from Patience.
Hello everyone, my name is BitGhost and I have been sample hunting ever since I first joined the server back in September of 2020. It was because of Mr. Mister's speed up videos as well as the original sample doc that made me fascinated with finding some of the missing links of the Caretaker. My grandfather was a huge record collector, gathering stuff from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and ever since joining, I have been involved in discovering more about Eroica recording services, as well as going through any of the possible leads to truly help us solve and find the record that Friends Past Reunited, or FPR, comes from. I have also been going through my late grandfather's collection to try and find anything that could help or be an improvement to previously found samples.
Hi folks, I'm Lane, and I'm relatively new to the sample finding scene, only joining in April 2021. I joined the scene after viewing the work of Mr. Mister's Google Doc and later the Caretaker Wikia. The main song, which became my main curiosity for the hunt for samples, was Place in the World Fades Away because of its mysterious, melancholic melody and almost unintelligible vocals.
Hello everyone, Jordan Curing here. I'm the owner of the Caretaker Fan Project's Discord and primary manager of the Caretakers, a fan project group. I have been interested and participating in sample finding for a good while. I found the Caretaker around the start of last year and was immediately fascinated by the usage of samples and began looking up what they were and where they came from, and after a good while I happened upon the old document created by Mr. Mister.
I became interested in the moniker at around early 2020, and immediately I was intrigued in what the samples were. However, to my dismay, there was little knowledge recorded for the moniker, as well as inconsistent information across the internet. I took it upon myself to create this sort of hub on the Google Docs to house said information in addition to any new information that popped up. But eventually that grew and had to make more documents, and ultimately I had to move over to the fandom wiki, where it could be better accessed and documented. I'm very happy with what the community has found, and I cannot wait to see what comes next after this video drops. Often we get asked about how these things are even found, especially to tracks with major distortions, and just as often people expect a simple answer. But that is far from the case, and in fact many techniques are used to find samples. It can get a little messy though, as we bounce between various albums, but hopefully this will give some insight into how these things are done, why certain things are found now and other things not so much, and maybe even let you get your bearings so that you may end up finding a sample for us in the future.
My first Caretaker submission was I Have Become Almost Invisible, to some extent like a Dead Man, which samples Franz Schubert's Der Leiermann. Approved on July 21st, 2014. I discovered this by mere chance, or fate for those who believe it. Around 2009 or so, sometime in my early 20s, I watched and fell in love with the movie In Bruges, which features a scene with the song Der Leiermann by Schubert. While I was in New York, after having seen the movie once again and listened to the Caretaker album, I made the connection, and spurred by the recent discovery of Who Sampled, I decided to register it. As I began to discover more of the Caretaker persona and its origins in The Shining, I discovered some very obvious ones from the soundtrack, other ones from YouTube comments, and one which even required me to install Audacity and reverse it, which was Robins and Roses.
Sample finding as a work often comes down to trial and error based on previous discoveries, and that was very much exemplified by the discovery of the samples from Patience After Sebald, which involved taking discoveries made by Clayton and searching for matching renditions from multiple websites such as YouTube and archive.org. Ultimately, it was tough to find correct renditions in a sea of very similar sounding performances, but ultimately it came down to comparison via sound and spectrogram, and resulted in the breakthrough that led to the rest of the samples on both Patience and Extra Patience. Many samples have been found by similar methods. One major example would be the work on Eternal Bewildered World from Everywhere at the End of Time Stage 3. The song was found, but it took us a good while to come across the correct performance. Another thing has happened with Friends Past Reunited. We found the song itself a while ago and have spent a long time searching for the extremely rare choir record Kirby used and has given us details about on multiple occasions. A lot of sample finding is simply connecting dots, making discoveries and making discoveries off of other discoveries. I guess that's the fun of it, slowly building more and more knowledge.
There are probably a lot of you out there who don't know the process in which samples are searched for and found. Some of you may think that it is simply combing through hours and hours of music. However, it runs much deeper than that. The key to finding samples is making connections between them. While I could list examples of connections that can be made between samples, talking about the developments made behind Caretaker albums could give you a better idea on how connections are made. Take for example the album Selected Memories from the Haunted Ballroom. One of the first developments made for Selected Memories was the discovery of Pennies from Heaven, a compilation album that contained a few of the known samples at the time, including In the Dark, Haunting Me, and You in the Night. Searching for records that have a certain sample on them can lead to discoveries of more samples, as Leyland used a lot of compilation records in his work. For example, when we found the sample to A Handful of Stars off of Selected Memories, I did a comb of the source record and found the sample to Faith in Time off of the album We'll All Go Riding on a Rainbow. This was also the case for the album An Empty Bliss Beyond This World. The discovery of one sample led to the discovery of many others. When Leighton and Johnstone was initially discovered, pretty much all of the samples for the piano tracks, not just from An Empty Bliss, were discovered very quickly. People also quickly picked up on the fact that Leyland only sampled from 2 Leighton and Johnstone records, which spared the people the effort to go through every single Leighton and Johnstone song. When Russ Morgan was discovered, the few songs we had found led to the discovery that all Russ Morgan samples came from the same vinyl record, which came in handy as we didn't need to search through every Russ Morgan song. Finding out what records that Leyland most likely used in his work can be immensely helpful, as it can both cut down searching time and lead to stones left unturned. One of the main developments that we have going on right now is a connection between A6, Things That Are Beautiful and Transient, and the track I Might Be Vanishing. After we had discovered that we were wrong about the sample to A6, I looked into possible connections and found that there was a striking amount of evidence connecting the two. First off, the record hum that is present in the background of both recordings is at a very similar frequency to each other, with I Might Be Vanishing at 124 Hz and A6 at 112 Hz. The reason these hums are in the background in the first place is because Leyland used a busted record player to transfer his records for An Empty Bliss Beyond This World. A6 is simply an outtake of the album, and the transfer was used after the fact. The hums' frequencies are also far closer than any of the other hums present in the other An Empty Bliss transfers. Both tracks also have a very similar speed offset, which was also caused by the busted record player. The speed offset for both is suspected to be only different by 1/100th of a semitone. In addition to this, both tracks are slightly panned to the right side as a consequence of how records are transferred. Other evidence, like how the record crackles in both exhibit a very similar pattern, have led us to believe that the two might be on the same record. While this is all just a theory and nothing is proven, theories like this are incredibly important to make, as it could shave hours of searching by giving us a narrow range of things to search for. Overall, the process of finding samples is much more than combing through hours of music. Connections and theories are necessary for efficiently searching, and without them, much more time would be wasted. Everything can be connected to something else, and it is up to us to discover these connections ourselves.
Another tool that is very useful is speeding things up. Often most Caretaker tracks are slowed down by a certain percentage, and this percentage closely aligns with a semitone change. If you don't know what that is, just think of it as a music scale, and the semitone representing a change from one note to another, similar to do, re, mi. The only exception to this rule are tracks released from 2003 to 2006, as I suspect the program Kirby used to make such alterations to samples did not have configurations for semitone changes. This is how samples were found for the latter stages of Everywhere at the End of Time, as simple speed-up reveals things that were previously hidden. Spectrograms are also incredibly useful as they can help us in figuring out if a sample really is correct. Normally, if you had the ears for it, you should be able to definitely tell if you have found a sample, though sometimes it's hard to make out the melody, which is where spectrograms come into play. Spectrograms, paired with speeding things up, can be very useful in verifying samples. It's always good to verify your own work, as not only does it allow you to confirm if you found something, but it also saves me the hassle of having to confirm it myself when I'm already tied up in other work as is. I too verify my own previous findings, and I'm constantly updating the sample portions to the fandom wiki pages. We may not get things correct the first time, but we do get them correct eventually. And now for the moment you all have been waiting for, and probably the part I'm most excited about, is how we got to here where we are now in regards to finding the sample for the final 6 minutes of Place in the World Fades Away, or otherwise known as Friends Past Reunited. While we don't have this sample, technically speaking, at least at the time of this recording, we have managed to find a ton of information surrounding the record and the company who produced it, among other things. However, I acted more as an overseer with this ongoing investigation, and so I'm going to let those directly involved in making such discoveries explain how everything went down, as well as any important findings made, and any ongoing developments. Stage is yours, guys.
Because of a user named Simone, we were officially able to confirm that the last 6 minutes uses O Jesu Christ as a sample. The melody was from that of St. Luke Passion, a piece that coincidentally has its own strange history. But it was a huge breakthrough for all of us, really. And it was because of this discovery that Person Man helped us find one of the key factors of helping us dive deeper into the mystery of this strange Eroica recording record. On December 30th of 2020, a private church recording of St. Luke Passion was posted to the internet for purchase. On the label, it said 3 Counties Recordings, recorded Good Friday, April 8th, 1966. The date stood out like a sore thumb. Immediately I knew that I had to jump on board, and as soon as the listing went up, it went down a few hours later when I got the record for myself. During the waiting time, we all had so many wonders and questions about the record that I just bought. Did St. Luke Passion source other Caretaker tracks as well? Was the record that I ordered the same one as Kirby's? We were all not fully dead set on anything, but about a week later, the record arrived, and I played it for the entire community.
Wait, is it really it, though? Hold on, no, wait, I need to hear that choir before I know. Hold on.
Yes, it's not the choir, it's a solo. There was no cough, though. There was no cough. It does match, though! Wait, hold on. The end, hold on the... Oh my god, Hear that ending well, boys. We did it. In a single day, we realized that tracks like Emptiness, We Cannot Escape the Past, and On the Edge of a Breakdown are all sourced from St. Luke Passion. And not only that, but Kirby's specific copy was very, very close to mine. Needless to say, though, we did kind of jump the gun just a little bit, and I may have screamed about it in a Discord VC while the record was being ripped. But after the transfer was done, a group was formed to get the proper track list fully down, not only for my record, but Deleted Scenes Forgotten Dreams, which, coincidentally, uses all of the St. Luke Passion record. Through talks in the group, we all decided on a personal theory of ours that the choir on my record, which is the Three Counties recording record of St. Luke Passion, is the exact same choir as Kirby's. Now, of course, we can't be 100% definite, but judging by locations and of these different recording services, getting addresses and seeing where they match up, it's a pretty likely match that this is the exact same choir. When it came to getting the tracks down, however, at first we all really kind of struggled with finding the tracks themselves and getting the proper names on them.
Until May the 12th, 2021. When Lane, that's me, found a few listings on eBay for a score containing a selection of melodies from St. Luke's Passion. This score was published by Patterson's Publications. One of the listings showed the front page, which documented a runtime of about 50 minutes. Going off information provided by Mr. and BitGhost, they both confirmed the record used an abridged melody of about the same runtime. This planted a seed in my head that maybe the publication will have the same track listing as the melodies present in the record. A digital copy was found on Encoder, but the free trial was stuck under a paywall. I took the plunge, and it was completely worth it. The copy contained the sheet music for several instruments, the lyrics created by the publication, and the track names for all songs used in the abridged version of St. Luke's Passion. The track name for Friends Past Reunited was discovered to be O Jesus Christ, Thy Cross Doth Call Me.
One of the main leads that we have on the Friends Past Reunited source record is the record label that pressed it. Leyland himself said in an email that the record label was Eroica, and we were able to deduce that it was Eroica Recording Services Ltd, a now defunct record label that was established in Manchester. Eroica Recording Services, which I will refer to as Eroica for the rest of this video, was a rather obscure record label, and as of now, we don't know anyone who we could get into contact with who would know something about it. However, this hasn't stopped us from scouring the internet for clues. Eroica pressed records in very limited quantities, as the label was usually involved in making demos or short-run releases, which all but confirms that the Friends Past Reunited record has very few copies in existence. Quite a few of the records pressed by Eroica have been private church recordings, which, yet again, give evidence to it being the correct record label. We have only been able to trace about 50 or so unique records that Eroica have pressed, and have only found audio for 3 of them out of the over 350 separate pressings that are presumed to exist.
Through further investigation, Person Man and I have found several things to help aid the search for this obscure label. It was discovered that the label opened up around 1949 and stopped activity in the late 70s to early 80s. Through a long search, the original owner of the label was found to be Mr. William Thurlow Smith. Along with this, several old adverts in various papers and magazines and original sleeves were also uncovered. The two of us also found the first and last location by address, an original record rip that was used for an eBay listing for a restored 1880s fairground organ, and even a photo of one of the original recording trucks. Each day, we are getting closer and closer to unraveling the ever-growing mystery of Eroica.
Another very important theory that we have reached is that Eroica also pressed the organ record that Leyland sampled. To provide a bit of background, Leyland owns an organ record that has been used in a few of his works under the Caretaker, and was used in its entirety in the album Deleted Scenes, Forgotten Dreams. It was also used for the organ section in R1, Place in the World Fades Away, which many of you probably know about. One major piece of evidence for Eroica pressing the organ record, stated on the back of many Eroica record sleeves, is that Eroica provides electrical organs for anyone to assist in recording. It certainly sounds like the organ record uses an electric organ, so this is important to note. The organ record itself also doesn't seem to have any mention on the internet, which points to it being a rare and limited record, just like the pressings done by Eroica. Something more circumstantial, but still important to note, is that Leyland used both the Friends Past Reunited record and the organ record in full in Deleted Scenes, Forgotten Dreams. This could suggest that the records are related in some way, and could point to them both being from Eroica. Overall, I think that the organ record and the Friends Past Reunited record are related in some way, whether that be them being on the same record label or some other reason. Progress on gaining information about these records have been great, and I'm happy to see how far we have gotten in the past few months. I hope that we will be able to find them soon.
Kirby's decision to stop producing as the Caretaker at the conclusion of Everywhere at the End of Time, and sticking with that decision, showcases his dedication to discipline in such extraordinary fashion. At the point of its conclusion, the Caretaker moniker, after 20 years of releases, mixes, collections, and more, was only beginning to see the heights of its recognition and success throughout the internet because of Everywhere at the End of Time.
I mean, what a perfect final statement for the Caretaker. I don't know, I feel like he feels like any other artist would feel like, okay, I had this great concept, it got really popular, so I went in and I continued to do it, but now I'm kind of tired of it and want to move on to the next thing. I don't think that there's any other sort of corner of this concept that that is left to explore for him, so I'm just excited to see what he does next.
While many other producers or artists would come back to a previous project if it had wild success and possibly try to recapture its glory, all while risking the comeback to leave a dud on the legacy of said project, Kirby's decision to put the Caretaker to rest once and for all only adds to the lore and richness of the tale. It's beautiful and it's humble, and I'd be more than happy and thankful to have Everywhere at the End of Time be the final goodbye forever. The Caretaker may be dead, but as Kirby says, may the ballroom remain eternal. James, if you are watching this, I want to thank you for everything. I want to thank you for responding to my emails and always writing back to me with such sincerity and attention. You know, it's very easy to put musicians or creators in general that we admire on such a pedestal as if they are in a league completely beyond you and I, some sort of state that makes them untouchable or impossible to communicate with. But it's creators like Kirby that remind us we're all just humans. We all share many of the same questions about life, and we are all in this together. What are your thoughts on Everywhere at the End of Time? Does it remind you of someone special, maybe a moment in time or a specific place or room? Let me know in the comments below, as well as any other albums, artists, or genres you'd want me to explore for a future video on this channel. Also, if you've made it this far into the video, comment "May the Ballroom Remain Eternal" in the comment section below as well, I want to see who made it all the way through, as this will no doubt be the longest thing I've ever done on this channel. A big shout out to everyone who has joined me in this video and has helped make it a reality. If you want to get involved in the Caretaker community, whether that be joining the sample hunt or simply just stopping by to share your feelings about the project, make sure you head on over to both the Caretaker subreddit and the Caretaker Discord server. Both communities are full of awesome and creative folks. Until next time, my friends, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. May the ballroom forever remain eternal. Much love, your boy, and we'll talk soon. Pad Chennington.
Happy birthday. This is from Nonna and Nono, and I hope you had a nice day. I could have called you before, but I was busy. But anyway, we wish you a very, very happy birthday. I call you maybe later. Maybe I could talk to you. Anyway, have a good day. Ciao.